Go ahead and stand with me. We'll get to the text. If you haven't been here the past couple Wednesday nights, I'm going to kind of jump in the middle of something here, and it may be like a jerk to you. We have been talking about the soul and what the soul is, the heart of man, and we sort of differentiate a little bit between the spirit and, of course, the body. And the soul is the inner man. And the Bible gives us some language and obligation that we're to care for our soul. You could use the word heart here, but it's something we're to take care of, we're to nurture, we're to protect our soul and our heart, this inner man. And so we've talked about that. And then we've introduced the thought of modernity, this modern culture, and how there could be a collision between soul and modern culture. And that's sort of what we're looking at. And so I'm going to read a text tonight that has we're going to take a broad application from the text tonight for the thought I have. And so let's look at that verse. It's one that you would be familiar with because it's one of my favorite verses, Ecclesiastes 4:6. It's been a life verse. It says, "Better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit." And I love the verse because it's so descriptive. And you can see it, right? We've all juggled too many things in our hands before, and often we juggle too many things, something falls. And too often in the Christian life, important things can fall when we're involved in too many inconsequential things. And so when it concerns the soul, we want to protect it, and it just might be that we're going to have to decomplicate our life or simplify, or at least be mindful of all that we're putting into our life that could potentially be harmful. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for the evening that you've given us and this time to assemble the church family. Father, we're very grateful for it. I pray we never take it for granted. I am so appreciative of the fellowship or the friendships that are shared here. Lord, tonight I think of our teens and the special event they're having. I pray you'd bless it, watch over it. I pray that many young people have come because of the invitations that have gone out this week, and they would just have a great time to keep them safe. Lord, for the Awana program upstairs, I pray that, Lord, young people's hearts would be knit to your heart in a greater way because of the efforts of this evening. And then, Lord, as we just consider, Lord, the world we live in, and, Lord, our place in that world, and my prayer is that we just be mindful tonight, mindful of our soul's condition. And if we need to make changes, Lord, help us to do it. And I ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for standing. The last couple of weeks, we have considered or begun to consider the thought that much of what is modern and or contemporary, and my thrust has been technology, really, may not be hospitable and or healthy for our soul. Okay? Now that's the premise that I'm asking you to do business with over the last few weeks, that the modern world, the world we live in, that is very, very different from the world that the vast majority of history has lived in. The world that you and I live in is relatively new to mankind. It's really relatively new to the history of humanity. For thousands of years, men have lived in relative simplicity, not thousands of choices. Many of us can even remember the day in modern contemporary structure when I can remember going to the store and seeing like 3 choices for cereal on the cereal aisle, and Cheerios was one of them, and then maybe Wheaties or something. If you walk down the cereal aisle today, your mind will blow. Like thousands of choices. The world has changed just on that aisle alone. And the point is that humanity has lived out its majority of history minus skyscrapers, minus great numbers of people being huddled in a mass in a city, minus the technology. So much of it a blessing. A lot of it has made life easier, but we made the point not just because things are easier, are they always better for the heart or the soul or our character? So not my intent in this short series is not to make technology evil. I don't think it is. It's not for you to throw away your iPhone or your, an Android. It's not for that. It's not to make the TV a villain. And I know preachers can do that. And I don't have I'm not fighting that battle. That is not my point, is to cast evil shade on technology. My point is this, is that even things that are benign, potentially not harmful, in unguarded proximity to us can be dangerous. Things that are just in the air, if we're not careful of it or we don't filter it, can do damage to it. I mean, consider modernity. We're not talking about this yet. I think we're going to. But like when I say modernity, I have things in mind like the hurried pace of modern times. Like our schedules are crazy today. And I have talked to some of you even the past week, and you said things like this, well, I have, soccer practice, and then, this practice and this practice. If you have more than 2 or 3 kids, you're pulled this direction, and then I have this meeting and this meeting, and I have to go here and here. And the obligations of modern life are just extraordinary. I was telling my wife, I think today or yesterday, I said this week I've just been pulled in multiple directions. And like I want to be here, and I feel like no matter what I do, I'm not where I'm supposed to be or where I should be, and I feel like I live in this fear of disappointing people because I can't clone myself yet, and pray that technology never comes, because that would be bad. But a hurried pace sometimes just does damage to my heart sometimes. Because of the pace, there's increased worry, there's increased anxiety, we have more financial burdens and responsibilities than we've ever had before. We have this constant information influx into our lives that is just inordinate. I read a study the other day, and it says that the average in our lifespan, the accumulated information that I'm going to absorb in my life, Troy Dorrell, that the accumulated information that I've lived in my life, that if you were to go back 200 years in time, it would take 200,000 people to equate the same amount of information that I have processed that 200,000 different people would have processed in their lifetime. Now, I'm not saying in terms of intelligence, I mean this passed through this year and out of this one. That is unbelievable. The amount of information I am processed that comes through me, that the rest of human history, I mean, they wouldn't have had a fraction of the things that come into our life. I'm not sure it could be benign, but I'm not so sure that has an impact on our souls. I don't think anything about modernity of itself is evil. Again, this is not a sermon about getting rid of your technology. I don't think a computer is evil. I don't know that AI that's coming is going to be evil. Neither do I know that it's going to be safe. I don't think these things are sinful in and of themselves. Matter of fact, I think there's probably appropriate and beneficial ways to engage with technology, your phone, your computer, and these things. However, I think we can all agree that the sheer quantity requires some contemplation on our part. I think we can all agree that much of what comes across these mediums is not wholesome. I could rant about pornography, and I could rant about the gambling online. I could rant about 1,000 things. That's not my intent tonight at all, although those would be fair things to discuss in terms of what comes across. I think much of what comes across media and technology, and I mean from the spectrum of TV all the way to your phone, I think much of it is opposed to Christian values and ethics. But the thought tonight is that the sheer volume of information we are trying to process is overwhelming our cognitive and emotional state. And I know these are bigger thoughts, but tonight I want to ask us to do business with these again. I know this is the 3rd time, but I'll be done soon, I promise. And so my great concern about the modern world is what it's doing to our souls. And so for the moment, let me just take away the evil component and just talk about the idea of dilution. In other words, if this is what something is in terms of concentration, and I put it into an ever larger bucket, then what's in there just can become more diluted and more diluted and more diluted. Does that make sense? My concern for our hearts and our souls is this, is that we are pumping in so much information, and for our purposes, just meaningless information, that I'm not so sure we're not having to kind of like a hollowing or a shallowing of our spiritual state. In other words, I hear this argument, well, what we're watching isn't evil. I get that. All that we're seeing, again, I make a joke about puppies and flowers. Okay, but the point is, I just think there's this, our souls are becoming hollowed out. We're becoming shallow. We made the point that the more of anything we hear, the less that any of it means to us. When we're exposed to thousands of things we can't care about at all. We're exposed to thousands of things we can't know anything really about any of it at any level of depth. Was it Mr. Rogers said that this world is guilty of being a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of any kind of understanding of the world at large? And I think that's really true. So I'm just asking us to consider the hollowing or the shallowing of our soul. I think the world can be evil, but I think today's world just makes us shallow. I don't know that our souls were meant to be exposed to so much meaningless information and content. If you consider that Martha was cumbered about much serving in her day. It just makes me laugh, sorry. Martha, and the Bible points out Martha for the sin or the dilution of her soul, her inability to sit at her Savior's feet like Mary did because she was busy. Like if that was the problems in Martha's day. You follow me on what I'm saying? If she had to cook and clean and serve and she felt overwhelmed by that. I mean, then what's happening to us? And how much more guilty could we possibly be? No great sin in Martha's life, right? Not the way we think about evil, but what she was doing in the complexity of her day was keeping her from sitting at the feet of Jesus by contingent as this, in the inordinate amount of information coming into our world, how could that be keeping us from the priority of sitting at Jesus' feet? I think our spirit could be in more anemic spiritual condition than we may realize. Imagine today in the hustle, the bustle, the schedules, the demands, the calendars, the infusion of all the nonstop 8 to 10 hours of connectivity to something other than God and quiet and meditation and reflection, what that might be doing to us. I believe that it is spiritually dangerous. I think we are more spiritually anemic than we realize. I think we do not have the connection to God that previous generations had the opportunity to. Not because the world is just more evil, because it's just more full. I want you to consider the volume of our social media intake. Now, I'm always a little reluctant to use sources other than the Bible for preaching, for study, yes, but for my preaching. I'm going to reference a book a couple times. It's a secular book. It's not a Christian book, but it has a number of studies in it for people who have the concerns that I have, but for different reasons. And so I'm just thinking, if secular scientists are worried about the dilution of the inner man, how much more should Christians be? And so I'm using it as a source because we're looking at the same study for different reasons, but all this is tied to data. Data suggests that the average person across the world, this isn't the Western world, it'd be more for Western world, but across the world, the average social media user spends 3 hours a day on social media platforms. Okay? Now think about the apps. We talked about this. It could be Amazon Prime, it could be Netflix, it could be Snapchat, it could be YouTube, all these things that we've discussed. 3 hours a day on specific platforms. The average person who has a phone uses per day as many as 8 to 10 different apps on their phone. And again, I'm not suggesting that these are even evil. I'm just simply saying that people are using apps on their phone 3 to 4 hours a day. Some examples: Gen Z is sort of heavy on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. The millennials like YouTube, Facebook, and Snapchat. Gen X likes YouTube and Facebook. And the baby boomers like Facebook and the games that are on them. The global average screen time, this is where this gets inordinate. Okay, now, they're spending time on these apps. I keep forgetting to bring my phone. But if I just had a phone, I don't want yours, Dewey. Dewey's got a deer picture on his. He shot a deer the other night, so I know it's going to be the screen. Just the time that someone has device in hand and looking at it, okay, for whatever reason. Answering a text, a phone call, the amount of hours, and this is the Western world, that someone has phone in hand and screen time, okay? Not necessarily using an app, but just looking at the screen. The average person engages with that phone 8 to 10 hours a day. 8 to 10 hours a day. Not 18, 8 to 10 hours a day. When you divide that, because Terry asked me, well, how does that work when you divide it on all devices? Well, for people who use multiple devices, the average time is 3 to 4 hours on the phone, 3 to 4 hours on a computer, and 1 to 2 hours on miscellaneous devices. And I'm assuming that means things like iPads, reading devices, whatever. Okay. Can we just stop and process that thought for a moment? Looking at a screen for 8 hours a day? Because that's brand new to humanity. Your grandparents didn't do that. As a kid, I didn't have a phone. I remember getting my first phone. You remember that? I was a school teacher. It was a Motorola. It was like a brick. It was a flip phone. It was awesome. We should all go back to that probably. But we went from that. Whatever we did with our time before, we weren't looking at a screen 8 to 10 hours a day. And I'm not saying it's all of you. I'm just talking about this is a worldwide global phenomenon. So what are the impacts of this? Well, people across the spectrum of concern are asking questions because this is such a new, novel thing. What's it doing to us culturally? What's it doing to our psychology? What's it doing to us socially? These are the kind of questions that scientists are asking. They're not asking what's doing this to us spiritually, but they're asking, what's this doing to humanity? So I think it's fair that we consider that. Well, what scientists have discovered is that it has reduced sleep time for nearly everyone. Now, it has nothing to do with the blue light that comes across it, the amount of time they spend on it. There's 1,000 reasons, but study after study after study says modern man sleeps less time because of time on screen. Okay? Now, that's its own study. What's that doing to you? Reduced interpersonal interaction. Well, that's a big duh to me. Go watch two people eat dinner at any restaurant because they're both looking at their phone. Go watch people walk down the street and they're on their phone. Drive down 169 and watch people. What they're doing, they're on their phone, right? See, the whole sales pitch a little bit of Facebook and these things, and I'm not making them arbiters of evil, but the whole thing is, hey, let's give you a world of interconnectedness, but it's providing the opposite. More people are lonely today than ever before in human history. They're studying a range of harm across the mental health spectrum, including impaired cognitive ability. They're actually finding the narrowing of the cortex of the brain. This is responsible for reasoning, a large part of our cognition that's actually thinning because of the use of our time on a screen. And doctors and all those don't know exactly all the implications of that, but it's meaningful that we're altering the morphology of our brain. Another study, loneliness exponential has risen. Behavioral issues, aggression, you think? I mean, I'm not talking about games yet, but all the time that young men spend shooting each other and other people and zombies and a thousand other things, impact on the psychology, maybe? We can't drive down the street without somebody honking on us and being mad at us for it. People are more aggressive today. This is crazy. Some studies suggest that a lot of kids are hyperactive depending on what they watch, and other kids experience a great more degree of lethargy because of it. Everyone agrees there's a whole lot more emotional dysregulation. People can't control their emotions the way they used to be able to. I talked a little bit last week about addiction, and I talked about how that works, that when you are on a screen and watching anything remotely entertaining, that creates a system where you release endorphins and hormones that give you a degree of satisfaction, so you repeat the behavior. But here's the sad thing. What's happening to people is they do this, and in that downtime of not having access to a screen, they feel bad, so they go back to it. And they feel bad for not using it, so they go back to it. Feel bad for not using it, so they go back. That's the cycle of addiction. The same way it works for alcohol, cocaine, or anything else. And they are discovering that like the addiction to pornography and the addiction to puppies and flowers is every bit as strong as our addiction to alcohol and cocaine. And I've asked you to test that theory by putting your phone away for a day. I think it's more difficult than we think. Addiction, this vicious style. People who use the phone to this degree have a lot more stress. I know this sounds silly, but this has become a real issue. FOMO. Like FOMO is driving people crazy. Fear of missing out. FOMO. Like they have to run to their Facebook to see what's happened in the last 20 minutes because something may have changed in the last 20 minutes. And they have to go check Facebook because something might change, or Instagram because something may have changed. And like everyone wants to know everything about everything, not to do anything with it, but we're driven back to the device, these devices because of this. Another study, insomnia is up exponentially. Digital eye strain, myopia, obesity is tied to screen time use. The developmental delay into maturity, especially for young men. Study after study is giving us research that says that young men, especially using games, are experiencing a developmental delay into maturity. Like I could pick any one of these and go off on it. I don't know if you think that's evil or not. I'm not saying it's evil. I'm saying it's different. Brain structure change. The thinning of the brain's cortex. I've already mentioned that. This is a huge issue. It's a concern for me. Reduced focus, reduced attention, the inability to solve complex problems is showing itself up over and over. I'm going to read some things from this book, and forgive me for doing that. I don't do this often, but it's helpful for me to do this a little bit, I think, tonight. I want you to just listen to what these studies are saying. Okay, now the idea tonight is just the deluge of information, and I'm asking you to consider the possibility that's diluting our soul or spiritual connection to the Lord. Here's what this guy says. One way of thinking about this, and let's talk about the information coming our way, is that at the moment we are drinking from a fire hose. There's too much coming at us. We are soaked in information. The raw figures of this have been analyzed by two other scientists, Dr. Martin Hilbert at the University of Southern California and Dr. Priscilla Lopez at the Open University of Catalonia. Picture reading an 85-page newspaper. In 1986, if you add up all the information being blasted at the average human being, TV, radio, reading, it amounted to 40 newspapers worth of information every day. Now this is old. By 2007, they found it had risen to the equivalent of 174 newspapers per day. And this was before scrolling. The increase in the volume of information is what creates the sensation that the world is speeding up. How is this change affecting us? Soon smiled, this is the scientist, because this guy did research on this, soon smiled when I asked. He said, here's the thing about speed that feels great. It's part of why we feel more absorbed in this, into it, because it feels great. You get to feel that you are connected to the whole world. And you feel that anything that happens on the topic, you can find out about it and learn about it. But we told ourselves we could have massive expansion in the amount of information we are exposed to and the speed in which it hits us with no cost. That's not true. That is a delusion. It becomes exhausting. More importantly, Soon said, what we are sacrificing is depth. Now we're into a Bible word. Deep calls unto deep. He says we are sacrificing depth in all kinds of dimensions. I love this. This is so Bible. Depth takes time. And depth takes reflection. If you have to keep up with everything and send emails all the time, there is no time to reach any depth. Depth connects you to your work relationships. That takes time. It takes energy. It takes long time spans. It takes commitment. It takes attention, right? All those things that are required for depth, they are eluding us. It is pulling us more and more to superficial relationships and superficial thinking. Okay, what are they saying? That we're losing our ability to focus on anything long enough to make it meaningful or to perhaps to solve the problem that is presenting to us. Now that's dangerous. One scientist observed, our cell phone is a thing we put in our pocket. And it's with us all the time. This is profound. And our cell phone always offers us an easy thing to do, not necessarily an important thing to do. Ouch. I've said this many times. A device that fits in the palm of your hand is hardly made for the idea of temperance. Right? It's hardly made for the idea of temperance because it's just super convenient right here. And he's saying it offers you Angry Birds versus a newspaper article on the meaning of life or meaningful news of any depth. I'd rather play Pac-Man on my phone. I don't know what the games are today. I'd rather play some game on my phone than do research, from the American. You follow me? Okay, I'm just saying this is what's happening to us. The result is a reduced willingness to do hard things. People just give in and quit sooner. A reduced ability to desire to do hard things, problem solve. It's been said over and over, this will be maybe the first generation who's going to face problems that we're going to be unable to solve because we don't have the capacity to solve them anymore. And not in terms of intelligence, willingness. Problem solving is becoming increasingly difficult to do. Okay, I'm going to read it again. It says yellow, so I'm going to go to yellow. Are you okay with this? Okay. This guy is speaking to another scientist. As she spoke, I realized that the collapse in reading books in some ways was a symptom of our atrophying attention. And in some ways, the cause of it. It's a spiral. As we begin to move from books to screens, we start losing some of the capacity for the deeper reading that comes from books. That's a problem when the book we're trying to read is the Bible. And in turn, it makes us less likely to read books. It's like when you gain weight, it gets harder and harder to exercise. As a result, Ann told me, she is worried we are now losing our ability even to read long texts anymore. The concern isn't about someone's capacity to read a book anymore. The concern is someone can't even finish a long text. So this afternoon, I sent the deacons a long text, and I thought about this. I hope these guys are reading all this. Now, this is where scientists are concerned about the social condition of our culture. It's not that when we read a book, it's will we finish a text message. The scientist argues that we are losing our cognitive patience and the stamina and the ability to deal with cognitively challenging text. When I was at Harvard conducting interviews, one professor told me that he struggled to get his students there to read even quite short books. And he increasingly offered them podcasts and YouTube clips, and they could watch instead. And that was Harvard. I started to wonder what happens to a world where this form of deep focus shrinks so far and so fast. What happens when the deepest layer of our thinking becomes available to fewer and fewer people until it's a small minority interest? I gotta move on. Let me do another one. And I'll try to move away from the book here in a second. This stuff just amazes me. I think it's profound. He said, I asked Raymond why reading creates a unique aspect of the inner lives for other people over long periods of time. And he's saying, when we talk to people, when we read long books, he says, that will repattern our consciousness. You too will become more perceptive, open, and empathetic. So the argument in this deal is just like when we tell stories to our children, we talk to each other, that something good happens. When I read a long book, something good happens. I'm learning the empathy. I'm learning how social relationships work. I'm learning about humanity. There's a whole lot gained in long discussions, reading long books, and even in people reading books to us. This is being contrast to little short snippets of information, little things that just pass by. He said, when we have these kind of conversations, these bigger experiences, we become more perceptive, open, and empathetic. If by contrast, you expose yourself for hours a day to the disconnected fragments of shrieking and fury that dominate social media, your thoughts will start to be shaped like that. As a man thinketh, what's it say? Do you see a concern here? As a man thinketh, so is he. We used to think because we read the Bible. We used to think because we read people used to listen to long sermons. People used to have long conversations. Now everything is coming at us fast and short. So he's saying we're going to become like that, fast and short, tempered, fast and short thinking. Your internal voices will become cruder, louder, and less able to hear more tender and gentle thoughts. Take care what technology you use, because your consciousness will, over time, come to be shaped like those technologies. Man, that is Bible stuff right there. We're going to become what we read, and we're going to become the way we read it. If I sat there and read my Bible for an hour, that affects me one way. If you and I have a conversation for an hour, that's all positive and good. That does good things for my humanity, my empathy, our ability to relate. I'm reading your expression, you're reading mine. But when I get this, what he calls shrieking fast and furious, 10-second, 15-second things, one after another, that's the way our brain becomes now, disconnected from any meaningful thing, the inability to connect, inability to relate to people, chaos. And that's what the scientist says is happening to us. He says we no longer read, we skim. When you skim, you can't solve a problem. Skimming creates addiction. and requires more and more skimming to satisfy because skimming never satisfies. So we have less and less thinking at a deeper level. And that's the very thing social media is meant to do. Make you think less and come back more. It's meant to capture you over and over. We talked about last week. These apps that are free for a reason. Anything that's free is dangerous. If you pay for an app, you'll probably use it a little bit. If something's given to you free, everything behind it is driven by advertisement. And I told you last week, the smartest people in the world are now trying to figure out how to make you come back to the app. That's called addiction. Like, the smartest people aren't building rockets anymore. They're designing Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, and these things. They're designing the stars, the rewards, the likes, the hearts, immediate gratification, and they've got us. And I told you last week, the dangerous part is that we like it. Infinite scroll. Okay, I know not everybody uses their phone this way. And I know some people don't have any idea what I'm saying. And good for you. There's a man who designed and invented the infinite scroll. Now, if I say infinite scroll, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, you get on Instagram, Facebook, you can scroll forever, right? You just scroll. YouTube, even that one now. You get on it, and you can just keep doing this. Okay, that's not the way it always was on internet. You had a page, and then you might have numbers. There was an infinite scroll. You understand what I'm talking about now? Some people call it doom scrolling. There's a guy who invented that. His name was Asa. And he invented the infinite scroll. Brilliant man. He invented the doom scroll, and he says he had the exact same thoughts that the guy had when he invented the atomic bomb. What have I done to the world? The day that infinite scroll was implemented in social media, every app that used it, its viewership, the time went up 50%. Now, you listen? I'm sorry this isn't more spiritual, but I think it has deep spiritual implications. 50%. Okay? 50%. I want you to hear what he said. He said the logic of the underlying system was being laid bare for Asa, the guy who invented this. Silicon Valley sells itself by articulating a big, lofty goal, connecting everyone in the world, or whatever it is. But when you're actually doing the day-to-day work, it's about increasing user numbers. What you are selling is your ability to grab and hold attention. So that's what the people who employed him wanted, and that's what he made. All throughout so this man developed this, and then he's thinking, what have I done? So you with me where we're at? He developed this, he's thinking, what have I done? And he's beginning to tell people, I think I made a mistake. I think what we're doing might be dangerous for people. All throughout the industry, Asa kept meeting people who were going through similar crises. There were a number of dark nights of the soul that I personally witnessed, he says. He watched as Silicon Valley's own inhabitants seemed to be hijacked by their own creations and then tried to escape. When I met with several of these tech dissidents, it struck me how young they were. They were like almost children who had invented toys and watched their toys conquer the world. Everyone was scrambling to meditate in an attempt to resist the programs they had invented. He realized one of the ironies is there are these incredibly popular workshops at Facebook and Google about mindfulness, about creating the mental space to make decisions non-reactively. And they're also the biggest perpetrators of non-mindfulness in the world. I'm sorry for the length of this, but this just, to me, this is powerful. When Asa and a coworker started to speak out, they were ridiculed as wildly over the top. But then, one by one, all over Silicon Valley, people who had built the world we now live in were beginning to declare in public that they had similar feelings of concern. For example, Sean Parker, one of the earliest investors in Facebook, told a public audience that the creators of the site had asked themselves from the start, how do we consume as much of your time and consciousness as possible? That's what they wanted it to do. The techniques they used were exactly the kind of thing that a hijacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting the vulnerability of human psychology. The inventor's creator, he said it was me. And guys like Mark Zuckerberg, it's Kevin Sandstrom on Instagram. All these people understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. He added, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. Kamath, I can't say his last name, who had been Facebook's vice president of growth, explained in a speech that the effects are so negative that his own kids aren't allowed to use that. Tony Fadell, who co-invented the iPhone, said, I wake up in cold sweats every so often thinking, what did I do to the world? He worried that he had helped create a nuclear bomb that can blow up people's brains. Okay, I know that's deep. And you're thinking, I don't feel any of that. And that's problematic. That's problematic. So if you can get up on a Sunday morning, and I've encouraged you 10 times now, and you get your user report for the week, and if you aren't bothered by it, I think that's fantastic. But I have had lots of people come up to me in the last few weeks and say, I had no idea. And that's the whole thing. They have no idea, and we're not thinking, and what is this doing to me? Because it's like the frog boiling in the pot. He's not perceiving that things are changing in him and around him. For everyone who has a kid, you have to think about this. For everyone who has a child growing up in the digital screen world, you're going to have to apply some mental, cognitive, and spiritual thinking about that. You can't just worry that the content is benign anymore. You need to worry about the sheer volume of the content. You should be a little worried. I mean, PBS made Big Bird for a reason. And that reason was to capture children's attention. Is Big Bird a problem? Well, not in terms of good and evil, but what did he do? Well, he taught children in order to learn, you have to be entertained. Now, that is problematic. The medium that we use to communicate anything alters its message. That's why TV has gone from, it tried to be just, an on-screen newspaper, but the medium doesn't fit it, so now it's become what we understand as entertainment. Information obliterated, entertainment highlighted. And the screen isn't any different. It's just a smaller TV. So, better is a handful with quietness than one handful of the iPhone. Throw it away? Well, I'm not going to, and you're not going to. So how about this? Just consider it. Is that fair? Like, think about it. Consider the biblical idea of temperance. Consider the biblical idea of occasional abstinence. The idea of fasting, not just biologically, but fasting digitally. I mean, I'm not yet worked into this series on solutions, but I want us to think these big ideas. We have to start considering managing the beast. Too much of anything, especially candy we like, probably isn't good for us. Because I am contending it could be vexing our soul in terms of making God a less and less priority, because to do that sometimes requires hard work. It requires long times sitting down and reading the Bible. It takes long times of quiet meditation. It requires someone willing to fast, someone who's willing to seek. And we're becoming less and less willing to do those things. Proverbs 15:6, better is a little with fear in the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. And you may not see it as trouble, but I'm saying a lot of scientists see it as trouble. The thought in the text, it's opposing one of quietness with one of vexation and travail. We can manage a little bit of almost anything, but we can't manage too much of anything. And that would be true in the material world. The more money you make, the more stuff you have, the more you have to oversee, right? And that's just vexing to a degree. And so that same truth is sort of there. The more, if we saw a little entertainment, okay, but the more and more and more and more we're exposed to this, then I think that can vex our soul. And even if the vexing, by that I don't mean evil, although I think a lot of it is. The vexing is it just removes you from God. Time with God. My thought is that the contemporary life is not allowing for the provision of quiet time. I was at the dentist this morning. 4 people were in there. One guess what everybody in the room was doing. No one was reading a book. They weren't doing what was important. They were doing what was convenient and easy. I'm not saying it was evil. I'm just saying I don't know that it's good for them either. With stuff comes the accumulation of responsibility. And I'm suggesting that the ingestion of too much mentally, too much information, especially just meaningless, could be harmful. If Mary was cumbered about with too much, if Solomon in multiplying his world experience was too much, what is happening potentially to us? In the text, materialism is in view, but the application is, I think for us, we possibly could live in an overstimulated, oversatiated, over-entertained world, and that might be problematic. If stuff, the handling of too much stuff is a problem for our hands, what's it doing to our brain? If stuff creates anxiety, what does 200,000 former lifespans pressed into one life do to our soul? I think it bears consideration. I got to stop. Okay? Would you think about it? Would you check your screen time on Sundays? If you haven't done that, it's a challenge. And we'll talk about this ahead, some ways to get a bridle on the beast and some other things as well. All right, let me ask you to stand. Thanks for your attention.